Channels Television's breaking news.
Well, news reaching us indicate that the police have taken over the Edo State House of Assembly complex in Benin City. They say is to forestall a large plan to attack the facility. Now, the armed security operatives are currently gathered at the entrance of the complex in large numbers, and they're not allowing anyone entry into the complex. So the police have taken over the Edo State House of Assembly complex in Benin City. They say to prevent any attack in building. You do remember that the former, deputy speaker had left, joined the APC, and then he was impeached, a new deputy speaker was put in place, and now perhaps this is what they want to avoid. So, but we'll bring you more stories on that as we get them.
In the meantime, we go to Ogun State, where schools may have resumed, but parents are reported to have protested 25,000 naira COVID-19 tests fees. Of course, the government has since denied or retracted that statement. So what is the story now? We have the Shegun Hassan, who is the SA media to the Ogun State governor. Thanks for joining us this morning. So please give us an update. What exactly is going on about this matter?
All right, thank you. My name is actually Remi Hassan, and I'm the Special Advisor, Public Communications and Media to the Governor of Ogun State. Back then, when we were planning the protocols for resumption of schools, especially for the exit classes, there were guidelines that we put in place for students to resume. It has to do with temperature check at the gate, no face mask, no entry, hand washing facilities in all schools, sanitizers in all classrooms, no assembly in the morning, no assembly at close, and all of that. But then that's for day students, because they coming in, as soon as they're done with classes, they exit the school premises from there. But for those who are going to be in boarding facilities, there are indeed schools in Ogun State that do 100% boarding. We had to come up with a separate protocol because their own stay in school go beyond the classrooms. They will have to stay in the hostel, the dining hall, the dormitory, and all of that. So more protocol had to come in, and one of them was the fact that every returning student in those exit classes using boarding facilities must undergo the COVID-19 test, so that even if they mingle, at least we're rest assured that the possibility of infecting each other will be near zero. And Ogun State has the highest number of private schools in Nigeria. And that essentially made it that majority of those who are in those boarding facilities are from private schools. Those in the government boarding facilities are just 500. And of course, the test doesn't come cheap. Even though the state has been responsible for all of the tests that has been done thus far. We had to now come up with a request from the private schools to know exactly how many their number of returning students in the exit classes are. Apparently, because they thought that data was going to be used for possibility of taxation, they were not forthcoming. When they finally came up with it, it was incomplete. It was far less than even half the required disclosure. At this point, the government had no choice than to just make a blanket 50% discount. The test normally cost 50,400, and a 50% discount took it to 25,000, mainly because the disclosure wasn't there. Because even if you are going to discount anything, you just must be sure what you are discounting and what the scope in terms of cost will be.
So what are they going to pay now?
When the protest came up, at the point when the 25,000 was announced, it turned out that the government had to respond that it was mainly because we don't have a full information on what we're actually subsidizing. So they came up with a figure on Monday, and it was about 5,000 students. And government looked at that and saw that it is still something government could cope with. The governor, in his wisdom, decided to make it absolutely free for everybody now.
So the students and parents have absolutely nothing to worry about. Does the same thing apply to public schools as well?
Like I mentioned earlier, if you've been following, public schools have just 500 students in boarding facilities. The rest are mainly day school students.
Now, apparently, one would expect that there's been a lot of conversation between the Ogun State government and the private schools, even the public schools as well, before this whole thing began. For that kind of communication about paying 25,000 naira COVID-19 tests to have gone out without the schools themselves being aware of it, it looks kind of questionable. What made that necessary in the first place?
Like I mentioned, prior to resumption, about a week before last week Friday, this mail was sent to the Association of Private School Owners, needing the details of their students who are in boarding facilities, especially because we realize that their own protocol for resumption will be different from the day students. The response to that request did not get to us until Friday, and when it came, it was incomplete. I called it partial compliance, which itself is non-compliance. So by Saturday, when the interface with the schools will hold to finally give a go-ahead to all the protocols, that was when this 25,000 communication was made, mainly because the disclosure was not total. And like I said, you cannot subsidize abstract. You cannot pay for what you don't know the scope of what you're paying for. But when finally the details came, it was clear to government that government could still cope with paying for it, and that exactly was what the governor did.
And one now wonders what would happen, peradventure, hopefully not, if a student tests positive for COVID-19. They're preparing for exams, by the way, August the 17th, and it's not feasible, for example, to get those results before they resume. So what's the plan? Because, these students have their future ahead of them. Will they miss the exam? Will they write the exam under certain conditions? What really is the plan for that?
For those who may go down positive in the course of this test, to start with, in their various intermingling in classes, there are procedures that protect everyone, use of face masks, use of hand sanitizers, social distancing, and all of that. And of course, it's part of the plan. Anybody that goes down with symptoms, isolation centers have been made available within every school. Since it's only exit classes that are there, isolate such person and quickly do a test. Our lab in Ogun State, 2 of them, have a turnaround time now of 24 hours. So we may not have the capacity to do more than 500 to 800 per day, but of course, because of the exigency of this situation, there is also the possibility of reaching out to other places to also assist because of this. But then 2 weeks is long enough for all of these to wrap up before the exams proper begins.
Right, Dr. Lawrence Olumide joins us now. He is the President, National Association of Proprietors of Private Schools, NAPS, Ogun State. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Well, the issue on the burner is that of the COVID-19, 25,000 naira COVID-19 tests fee that parents were supposed to pay. Where do schools stand on this? Initially we have been made to understand that schools were requested to submit certain statistics, but you guys were not upcoming on time.
Hello.
Dr. Olumide, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you. Good morning.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Well, good morning. I want to appreciate the privilege to come up, Channel Television.
Yes, sir.
I didn't quite get that your question because I lost the network.
Okay, let me come with the question again. The government of Ogun State said they made some requests to you to provide some statistics to aid them in knowing whether or not there's going to be some kind of intervention. But the schools were not forthcoming. The management of schools were not forthcoming with those statistics on time. Is that true, and why is that?
Well, I don't know how that should be an issue. In fairness, the idea of a student hostel and the rest, came towards the end of the design of the guidelines for reception in Ogun State. And in the process of that, we got an info that we should supply a population of students in respective schools that have a hostel. Almost immediately, we responded, because responding was an online thing. Almost immediately. But the argument we are trying to advance here is that there is no basis, there is no reason for discrimination. As far as we are concerned, if government was actually planning to give discounts or to give, to subsidize for what? If you are not subsidizing for students in public school, why are you subsidizing for students in private school? Are they not from the same community? Are we not part of Ogun State? That was the agitation of parents, of which I am one. There is no basis for looking for data of population of students that hitherto the Ministry of Education should have beforehand. Now, the point is this: government is making provision for students in public schools. What is the offense of parents having children in private school? It is not the money that is the issue. The issue is the discrimination. Why the discrimination? I believe that was the exact thing that the parents, that got the parents agitated, and thank God for a listening governor that looked into the issue and felt, oh, it has to be done in the right way. So we are happy in Ogun State that His Excellency has done the right thing by reversing that act of discrimination, which is uncalled for.
Right. Well, there's been this talk, teachers saying that they're not going to resume if they're not protected. And I recall we were wondering, what does protection mean? What's the definition of protection? And I would like to know, schools have resumed, what kind of protection is being given to teachers? Because that's important. Yes, we've talked about students, but what kind of protection are teachers going to get? Is there a standard, a minimum standard that all schools have to abide by?
All right, now we are looking at private school here, right?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello? Yes, now at our level, you agree with me that private school, we have this personal touch. We have control over our employee. We have control over the student to a large extent. Now, don't forget that we are not saying that the student will get infected with COVID-19 from teachers. There is equally probability that student could turn around to infect teachers and employee of the school. So we are not protecting the student alone. We are equally protecting ourselves. This is the reason why in Ogun State, I doubt if there is any school that is government approved, that is under our association, National Association of Proprietors of Private Schools, that has not procured all the necessary gadgets that can safeguard individuals. Starting from the use of nose mask, we have touchless hand washing stand that we have dispersed to our members across the state. Those that couldn't afford the touchless, we have encouraged them to get buckets with taps, with soap. We have produced hand sanitizer as association, alcohol-based.
Okay, Dr. Olumide, just one thing before we come back to the SA media, to the Ogun State governor. Well, he has said the other time that one of the reasons for making that request of schools in Ogun State is the peculiarity of boarding schools, that they're not just going to be going home and coming back, they are going to be staying in schools, and consequently they needed to take more proactive action. The protocol for boarding schools needed to be a little different. a little more intense than for those who are day school students. How do you react to that?
It means it was not well thought out. Thank God the governor was not aware of it from the beginning until the parent began to agitate, because the governor, as I learned, had to summon the commissioner of health and the SA to the governor on education, all right, before the issue, was kind of resolved. Now, if you are talking of students in the hostel, to the best of my knowledge, I believe the students in the hostel are even more, they are better safe than students coming from home. Coming from home, don't forget, they will enter taxi. They will walk on the streets. They will go home to go and meet their parents that had gone out in the neighborhood. So they will come back to school. But we are talking of students that once they log into the school system now, they are in the school, all right? And we are not allowing visitors. We are not even allowing their parents to come. So they are better. They are safer than students coming from home and returning home, because you don't have control over the student the moment they leave the school.
Okay, just hang on a minute. Let's bring Mr. Hassan on this one, because I'm sure he has quite a number of responses to give to you. But Mr. Hassan, in addition to some of the responses you may want to give, so it does appear as though, well, it's not that it was the fault of the schools for not providing those details. As you said, they were not forthcoming, because he says, as soon as we provided it, it came much later. And besides, you should have had those information, those data in the first instance.
Thank you very much, Chamberlain. Again, I say, partial compliance is as good as non-compliance. There were those who complied, no doubt. But like I said, Ogun State is peculiar. We have the highest number of private schools in Nigeria. And if some of the private schools responded, that will not paint the proper picture of planning that we need. The data was insufficient.
So
and you cannot,
does it mean that Ogun State government you don't have those figures from the Ministry of Education by themselves?
At the level of having those who are in boarding schools, no. But in terms of the schools intake, yes, we do. Because the schools sometimes have reasons to expand their boarding facilities. So even if they start with some figures at the beginning, it is possible that at some point it will have increased. There are schools in Ogun State that do no day schools. They are 100% boarding, and they are bound all around Ogun State. So partial compliance, I repeat, is as good as non-compliance. And if we don't have all the data that we need, it cannot help us in planning. And like I said earlier, you cannot subsidize abstract.
Okay. If you didn't have figures for private schools, do you have figures for public schools in Ogun State?
I made that disclosure earlier. Okay. For all of our boarders in Ogun State, in boarding facilities, 500.
So why did, he was asking, why that discrimination? Why go for private and then you leave that of the public schools?
The number in public schools is so few, it is something that could be coped with. The number in the private schools were not initially completely supplied. And that did not put us in the picture of if it was something we could cope with. Because believe it or not, the lab may have been provided by the state, but that represents just like a kitchen. It still requires you buying ingredients before you can cook good food. And the reagent with which this test is done has to be procured with money. So if we don't have the true picture of the number that we are actually testing from private schools, what are we talking about?
So given the benefit of his response, when he then, suggesting that the unintended consequence of that action was that they thought it was discrimination and so they didn't internalize it well. So do you think it was a good thing to have come up with that policy or that strategy in the first instance?
To start with, private schools cannot be put on the same stead as public schools because they are in it for money, we are in it for service. That is the difference at initial. However, when it has to do with the health of the populace, the government has to take responsibilities. So for him to come from the angle of discrimination, sorry, we are not discriminating as a government, but of course those who want class in the name of quality education have gone for what they believe is class on their own level. So at that level, why is he not talking about discrimination for people patronizing private schools and not public schools? At the same time, are we saying that those who are in public schools are lesser being if government decide to take responsibility for them, as we have done in this case? even for private schools.
All right, Dr. Olumide, you heard him say, you know, you guys are, the public schools are for service, private schools are for money. And consequently, you need to be able to pay for some of the services that government may have to provide for you. How do you react to that?
Honestly, you see, the 25,000 of a thing incidentally wasn't meant for school owners to pay for it. It was the parent of those children involved that will have to pay for it. So it is not about us, it's about the parent. All right. So if you are now putting a bill on the parent because school owners are in school business, I mean, it doesn't correlate. Now, let us look at it from this way. As a school owner, we pay taxes to government. So if you are bringing COVID-19 payment for tests out, that is another taxation if you are directing it to school owners. If you are directing it to parents, that's another taxation for the parent, because we asked, those that were infected, that were tested, were they made to pay for it? Those that were in the public, those that were infected with COVID-19 that were tested and treated, government paid for it. So why should we? Well, there's no reason why parents should be made to pay for the test of COVID-19 results in an ideal situation. Like I repeat, I believe that the right thing had been done. So there's no point, there's no basis arguing over this again. Thank God for the life of our governor, who had seen who has seen the side of the parent and has reasoned along with them. I give kudos to him. So once the issue has been resolved, I think we can move on with our lives. So we have so much to do together.
Speaking of moving on, I mean, yes, exit classes have resumed, but there will come a time, hopefully sometime soon, that the whole school, I don't know how phased it will be, would also have to resume. Would you also be telling the government to maybe foot the bills of that test at that point, now that we're talking about moving on?
Do we also what?
Would you also be asking for the government to foot the bills of the test of students, other students that are not in exit classes, maybe when schools eventually reopen fully? Would you also be asking, the government to pay for their tests, maybe?
Well, I want to strongly believe that that will not happen. You see, one thing about this test of a thing, that test is valid only as at the point the test is conducted. You can be tested today, all right, even while you are waiting for the result of the test. And then you get contacted, if you have contact with somebody who had COVID-19 and you get contacted. So you may end up having...
Dr. Lumide, let me jump in and bring it back to Mr. Hassan. Apologies there. Well, Mr. Hassan, what is the state government satisfied with the compliance level with all those protocols upon resumption?
So far, we have no reason to be pessimistic. At the schools level, we've seen quite a lot of pointer to the fact that we've done what we need to do, both at the private and the public schools levels. The students themselves were joyous to return to school, and we've seen compliance with all the guidelines. And we can only hope, because this is a test case. Believe it or not, bringing students back to school in such a clustering environment, though there are protocols notwithstanding, it is a test case. And whether the whole school will resume or not, this is going to be a pointer to the fact of what will happen going forward.
We'll widen this briefly, but I was asking Dr. Olumide earlier about what happens moving forward. I mean, will the government also be willing to expand this when the full school resumes, to say, oh, yes, we're going to sort the test for other students as well?
In the present reality of the Nigerian nation, wholesale test is not possible at this time. However, temperature check and other kind of screening that points in the direction of symptoms, discovery and what have you, will be taken up by government, just so that we're sure that nobody goes down with any symptoms. And those who are symptomatic will be tested by government free of charge.
What? Yeah.
I mean, I was going to widen this really because, yes, schools have resumed, and a lot of people are wondering what happens to worship centers and other places that have been closed for months now, are you going to be looking into that too?
Yes, worship centers have already been given 14th of this month to reopen, and of course for a maximum of 200 worshipers. But if you have worship centers that accommodate more than 200 and you still want that number exceeding 200, you have to call for special request by the state government to come and look at the facility and look at the protocols that you have put in place just so that people are safe. And we've received quite a lot of requests from people, and by tomorrow, one of them will be visited in Ota. Some other ones will be visited around the Mowe Bafo axis next week. All of this is just to be sure that in reopening, we're not reopening to disaster.
Okay, so are you satisfied so far? Well, you said some churches or worship centers are calling for visits. There was a visit that the Ogun State government had some time ago. I hope you were satisfied with that one.
Yes, there have been some that we've been to, especially the mass gathering kind of worship centers. At the level of the Islamic people, you will notice that majority of the mosque are such that are built to accommodate large crowd. So they were the first set of people even requested that we visit their place, and of course we were able to advise them on what needs to be done, just so that everybody is safe in the circumstance. Okay. We visited some places, we're satisfied with some, and there are those that we've told in the circumstance there is a lot more you need to do before you can reopen with the number that you're asking for.
All right. Remy Hassan, SA Media to the Ogun State Governor, thank you so much for your time, as well as Dr. Lawrence Olumide, President, National Association of Proprietors of Private Schools, NAPS in Ogun State. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thanks for having us.
All right, then. So there you go. That is the show today. We thank you all for watching. Now for your comments as well. We'll see you again here tomorrow. I'm Chamberlain Uso.
I'm Kayode Okikere.
And I'm Ayo Makine. Have a wonderful day, and please keep safe.